Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin into the video. We're going to be taking a look at frame rate analysis and the graphical analysis of Ready at Dawn's The Order 1886. This is also an article if you do wish to check it out. It's linked in the video's description, where of course we do go further into detail of various aspects of this comparison, and you'll also notice some relevant sources and links to other bits and bobs which we might find useful. So let's jump into this. So the game does render natively at 1920 by 800. You'll notice the rather chunky borders, which does afford the GPU about 33% of extra performance compared to a full 1080p image, and the game of course does target 30 FPS, which it manages to achieve throughout most of the title. We will go into some areas in just a moment where it does fall short of that. The developers are stating that they are utilizing 4x MSAA, at least that was in the GDC breakdowns and some other Twitter comments, but there are certain sections of the game which look a little suspicious and not using 4x MSAA. So it's a bit difficult to tell because of the heavy use of post-processing effects, for example DOF and lens blur and stuff like that, which can soften the image just a smidge and makes it just that little bit harder to really know what's going on. But for all intents and purposes, the game looks absolutely beautiful in my personal opinion, and of course it does utilize both static as well as baked in shadows and lighting. The baked in is typically for environmental textures because obviously the game doesn't support dynamic times of day, so if you stand in the same spot for like 15 hours, it will look exactly the same. In other words, it doesn't go to day and then to dusk or night or what have you. In other words, it will always look the same. So baked in is definitely one area that they can kind of claw back some performance, which is definitely a positive, at least in my opinion. And they do have a heck of a lot of performance to utilize because, as you'll see throughout the title, there is a lot of different areas where they push to the graphics boat all the way out. For example, you'll notice that even the clothing the characters wear will actually move. It is to a degree physics-based. Now, we're going to come up to a section here where the frame rate does start to tank. You'll notice that it did dip just to 29 just for a second, but then managed to maintain a relatively stable area. But then as we jump over to this area, the frame rate does dip, and I have put in a little bottom box there where you can see that the frame rate is actually duplicating quite a lot of frames. So I've basically slowed this down to 20%, and it's quite noticeable in this area. I think it's because of the angle where you can see a lot of stuff going on the street, plus of course you've got the fog, but immediately when we drop back down, the frame rate becomes considerably more stable again, and this is the only area that I can really see that the frame rate takes a major hit. So it's possible that there will be some further optimizations and so on. I didn't want to kind of go super duper far into the game and then put all of that stuff in, because otherwise it's going to be, you know, acting on some spoilers, just as you can imagine. But this is fairly late in the game. It's about 3 hours or so in. Anyway, moving on. So what about other parts? Well, the character models look absolutely beautiful, and in fact the skin of the models is actually extremely expensive. There's a shader that's running which actually calculates the depth of the character's pores and their skin, believe it or not. And not only that, but it also calculates the direction lighting and other elements in the image are coming from, and that will actually accurately reflect in the skin. It's quite expensive, but it does look eerily realistic, at least in my personal opinion. And obviously, if you were to look at the actual overall environment, there's actually multiple stacked materials. So it's not just a case of like a cobbled street texture. You will actually have a cobbled street texture, maybe with some additional mud on top of that, and so on and so forth. And it basically stacks up, and they can actually support up to 4 of these stacks in their engine, and it looks rather beautiful considering that the environmental tiling art is running at 1024 by 1024, which is pretty impressive. There are some problems regarding the physics in the game, and I don't mean that you're going to get something particularly glitchy, by which I mean that a lot of environmental areas are not destructible. So while you can certainly destroy, let's say a lamp or a bottle on a table, you won't be able to go ahead and say blow up a large table. which may or may not be a big deal to you. I think it would add an extra level of realism if you could, but at the end of the day, this isn't something like Just Cause 2. I would personally like you to be able to destroy some of the cover or really deface some of the bricks, but alas, you just cannot do it. Similarly, and slightly out of the context of physics, if we look at the character's hair, the shaders, the lighting shaders on that, as well as the actual movement of the hair, is pretty baked in. In other words, it's not something like using like TressFX from AMD, which of course looks rather stunning if done correctly. Instead, you'll notice that the hair doesn't really accurately even sometimes reflect some of the things going on in the environment, which is a bit of a shame. In fact, in their analysis on their own post-mortem breakdown, they actually used a bit of a sad face there, so maybe that's something they can improve on in the future. But considering a rather healthy amount of data is going into just the textures, they've got 2 GB just for the texture budget, and then they've got another 600 MIBs for the character textures, and another 250 for global light maps and FX and UI and other such textures. You can start seeing that there's a hell of a lot of RAM just being really quickly gobbled up from not too much stuff at all, really. So in my personal opinion, with the lighting, you've also got other bits and bobs. For example, the game does indeed rather accurately support reflection occlusion, particularly on, say, the underside of weapons. In their own breakdown and analysis, they actually utilized a rifle to demonstrate what that means, and for all intents and purposes, all this does is stop, say, bright lights appearing where they shouldn't. If you need an example of that, it is actually in the article where I've kind of put together something. And obviously, as you'll see throughout the video, there are numerous examples of where you shoot glass and so on, which kind of illustrates my earlier point about destructible physics. Anyway, that's about all I can rabbit on for in this particular video. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. If you do want more information, do check out the article, which is quite lengthy and has got lots of images. So take care and bye for now.